Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. Well, as citizens, we all have varying degrees of understanding or awareness of the LAPD, but there are 5 citizens who are tasked with the responsibility to know everything that's going on within the department and help guide it. I'm delighted today to be joined by Police Commissioner Dale Bonner. So nice to have you here.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
All right, I had no idea that the LAPD Commission, the LAPD Police Commissioners, has been established for over 100 years. I mean, 5 individuals, citizens. How did that whole process come into being and the entity come into being, and what was it supposed to do and what is it currently doing?
Yeah, well, it didn't start in its current form. It was actually formed 153 years ago.
Oh, okay.
In 1870, and it was actually on December 31st of 1870 when the mayor signed the ordinance creating the police commission, which originally was comprised of the committee from the city council. And they were charged with overseeing and regulating the police department, subject to any final approval by the mayor and the city council. And when you look in the historical annals, one of the interesting things you see is that the purpose that was stated for the creation of the commission was a concern about potential hilarious activities that might unfold on New Year's Eve. So it was getting ready for activities that would be either on or coincident with the coming of the new year. So that was the formal impetus of the police commission, and then it was some years later when, through some charter changes and other work through ordinance, it was transformed to an all-citizen body. So it's now 5 citizens of Los Angeles who volunteer time to act as essentially the board of directors for the police department. So you oversee their work, and it's primarily a combination of making policy and then overseeing the officers' compliance with policy that's made.
I love the phrase hilarious because I'm sure the definition in that time period was, I'm assuming, different than it is now,
sure.
But absolutely. Well, you were appointed in 2018.
Yes.
So how did you feel about that appointment? What was it that led you to being in a position that would obviously make this a good decision on the part of Mayor Garcetti? And what were you thinking was going to be, the role, and how did you feel about it at the time?
Well, it was something that evolved over a period of time. I've always had a commitment to civic engagement and public service, and had served in a number of other public positions over the years, including one of which where I was over the highway patrol. So I had oversight of the California Highway Patrol. And in some work in Sacramento, I got also familiar with the prison system. And so I've always had some awareness of criminal justice and that set of issues. And when I finished that work in Sacramento, I had gotten to know the mayor through some of his work on the city council. And we had a number of conversations about the opportunity to do something and contribute in Los Angeles. And this opportunity came up. And originally, I thought that it was somewhat of a natural extension of some of the other work
Sure.
that I had done. And little did I know that the issues and the oversight of a municipal or a city police department, especially the size and complexity of Los Angeles and LAPD, vastly different. But it's been a good assignment nonetheless. And my interest really was, in addition to continuing the opportunity to serve, was really to try to encourage and help facilitate some of the positive change and really support the department's effort to be better.
Okay, I'm sure there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of what's happened over the last 5 years, but let's go to the practical nature of things. What does the commission do? Obviously, you meet. What do you discuss? What is brought to the table? How is the process actually in place?
Well, formally, we meet every Tuesday morning at 9:30, and those meetings can last sometimes 5 or 6 hours throughout the day. And the agendas consist of a combination of some administrative kind of things, approving reports and things of that nature. But it's also the opportunity to air amongst ourselves and with the public discussions about new policies and procedures that may be coming about and formulating. As you can imagine, a policy is not simply written overnight. Many of the reforms that you've seen here and elsewhere, some of which even here in Los Angeles were the product of conversations that an individual commissioner may initiate with the staff at the department, and then over a period of time and many meetings and discussions that then translates into some sort of an idea or a proposal. and then those get worked through with opportunities for public comment and the like at the commission meetings. One of the most important things that we do is occasionally, unfortunately, there are either a serious use of force, which could be an officer-involved shooting, or a head strike or something of that nature where there's a serious injury to someone in the public. And in those cases, one of our most solemn obligations really is to review all of the investigative materials and to sit almost as a jury, if you will, and make a determination as to whether the conduct of the officers involved was within the policy established by the commission or outside the policy. And so that's the formal work that's done. And in addition to that, there is a fair amount of civic engagement, community meetings and events and opportunities really to hear directly from the community. Recently, you saw there was a strong presence at the Martin Luther King parade, and that was a great opportunity to hear people just come out of their houses and come to the street and yell things to the chief of police and to a commissioner and others. So you use those opportunities really to hear what's on the mind of the public as well. And when you add all that up, sometimes it can be 20, 25 hours a week of work that is required, but it's certainly well worth the effort.
So as a liaison between, obviously, community organizations and the department, and then as you said, the citizenry kind of, I don't want to call it a judicial arm, but you did say, you do review everything. What rights and privileges do you have with the police department to ask, with the LAPD, to ask them for information? I mean, do they automatically give you things, or do you request them?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
So if you might imagine, there are a number of reports that are generated automatically that speak to the level of workforce, the number of officers deployed at any given time. I personally sit every Monday with the chief of police and the senior staff and receive reports on crime trends and what's happening throughout the city. And so some of those reports come pretty regularly. And then in addition to that, we have full authority to ask for any information that may be important in carrying out our duties. And some of that is protected information, the personnel records and things of that nature, which we don't get into. But if it's information about policy, procedures, and things of that nature, there's complete full range to inquire and to ask anything that may be of interest.
And how many times, what's the community input that you get? I mean, do you hear a lot from community organizations, and do you have good rapport and relationships with different groups that represent this enormously vast and diverse city?
It's a complex equation because, as is often the case, and not just with the police department, but with the city council and other public bodies, you hear most from those who are most upset or concerned
Sure.
about an issue. And so you have a number of activists and others who play that role, and that is their function, which is to very strongly advocate on behalf of an issue or an interest or a group of people that are not getting heard sufficiently. And then we have also input occasionally from the ACLU and other organized nonprofit groups that may send in formal comments and things and suggestions or criticism, which is a lion's share of what we hear. And then you have a series of other informal opportunities. Some are community meetings that are hosted by and with the department. And then oftentimes there are just events that you may appear at, whether it's a public event, sometimes hosted or not hosted by the police department. But if people know you're with the police department
Sure.
or associated, then
they make a beeline straight to you.
Hear directly. Yes.
I know. Obviously, you have an awareness before you even were appointed of law enforcement and the issues involved. The other 4 commissioners, are they all drawn from a variety of levels of interest and?
They are, and historically, I think this is probably true of the current commission, and probably true throughout its history. It's a very eclectic mix of people who come from backgrounds from business and law and other small business, nonprofit organizations, you name it. I think one thing, at least this is my own personal view, that I think what should be considered, it's a very difficult role to be performed. Someone asked me recently, and I had a great interest in bringing more young people to the table and to participate. But when you think about the level of commitment and the time, someone that is required to work on a schedule that may not be predictable and or may not have the opportunity to be away from the office and still get paid.
Right.
I'm lucky to have an employer that supports the effort and allows me to contribute the time. But many people are not, and who could and should have a view. So that's something that I think the powers that be, if you will want to look at going forward, is how, given how the communities have evolved and just how society and expectations have evolved, how do you really bring in more people who are really able to participate with the level that's required and still do other things, whether it's care for a family or work.
Well, in the last 5 years, there's been an enormous amount of things that have happened within the city, from a pandemic to demonstrations to the call for reform. Would you say that the heartache and drama surrounding the George Floyd incident was really an impetus for a lot of reform within the LAPD?
I look at it this way. Much of what we saw and heard even during and after the George Floyd situation was really started some years earlier. You had the Trayvon Martin killing in 2012 and Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2015. And I look at those incidents and a series of others as kind of the gasoline that was trickling out around the country, and then the George Floyd killing was really the match that started that's ignited this uprising that we saw in 2020, and then of course that was at the front end of a global pandemic that also I think had some influence. And much like the pandemic, that had the effect of accelerating a number of trends as to how we work and live and things of that nature. I think the George Floyd killing and the 2020 protests had that same effect of accelerating a number of policy reforms and work on issues that had been underway for some time, but really took on a new level of urgency in 2020.
I think of any time somebody wants a change happening in a large organization or a large institution or a large anything, it's a little bit like turning a gigantic, a ship in the middle of a very small bay. The effort is there and it continues to do it. And so how difficult is it to be able to recognize reform in a large department like the LAPD? Even all those efforts are in place and everybody's in the right direction and everybody's intent is solid and sound. But how difficult is it to actually get it to happen quickly and to have it visible to the populace so that they understand that things are really going forward?
I think it's like so many of the other issues, it's a challenge. First, I start with the idea that in a police department, at least in my opinion, you don't want a lot of rapid and sudden change. You want consistency and stability over time. I look at it almost like a piece of infrastructure that, a road or bridge that should perform pretty effectively and evenly over a long period of time, giving everybody kind of the same expectation and understanding of how it's going to work. So you don't want the pothole, the unexpected twist and turn in the road. And policing is similar in that regard, not only for what the public expects, but when you think about a department the size and scale of Los Angeles, of LAPD, where you have in this case, 9,200 officers, about 5,300 of which are on the streets on any given day. And that it's a process to have everybody understand what a new policy is, how it changes what they were taught and trained to do yesterday and what they may need to do tomorrow. And that's got to be done very delicately. So it's a process first of helping people understand why you're changing a rule. Oftentimes, many of the rules that are and reforms that are brought forward are things that officers first may not be fully convinced that need to be done, or they may have their own views about the need for it. And then once they're convinced that there's a need, they have a view about how it should be done. So there's a lot of discussion that's required, and at the same time, it's one of the challenges that I came here thinking that I would actively participate in a lot of that educational process, and to some degree we do. But when you think about the demands on the officers, when you show up at a roll call or a group of officers, you get a few minutes of time with maybe 6 or 8 officers at a time. The rest of them are out doing the work. So it's a very complicated process of that education process. And so the department makes a strong effort, particularly on the major efforts. Some of it is like you or I might use the internet at work and download materials that come out from management, and you study some things. The big things are done through running officers through systematic training, and that takes time when you have that number of officers. But as I say, a lot of it is the educational part of it. As they say in law enforcement, or some people said to me a number of times, the only thing that some officers get concerned with more than the way things are is change and the way things might come about and change. And it's just because of the complexity of having that assurance that you're really doing things the right way.
Within the LAPD, to calm the opinions, to appease the anger, to demonstrate to the citizenry that the LAPD is there to protect and serve, and will be something that the populace can feel safe and comfortable with. Because, you know, although the change might need to be incorporated slowly, the noise surrounding it is not hard to hear.
No, it's not. And you know, it's interesting that you put it that way, because in the 2020 protest in particular, officers not only heard a lot of noise that was directed at them, but they also were pelted with rocks and bottles and things of that nature. And I make that point because it is they're trained very effectively to deal with protests and unrest and protect the right to protest and the First Amendment. But it's a much different equation when the police themselves are the subject of the protest. And on top of incidents that we saw in 2020, which didn't occur in Los Angeles. So many officers have the view that may have said that, hey, talk to us about things that we may have done or that may have occurred here, but don't punish us for things that happen in Missouri or in Florida or Texas or Georgia or elsewhere. And unfortunately, I remind many of them that it's like other professions. You know, I'm a lawyer by trade, and nobody says, people don't love lawyers, but nobody says, oh, I love the New York lawyers or I love the Los Angeles lawyers. It's just these other lawyers that so part of it is, I think, have been a lesson of what it means to be in a profession that in the day of social media and the like is a national conversation. So just like the recent Tyree Nichols situation happened in Memphis, but it's very, very much affects the way people operate here. So it's just that part of it is the awareness. The second part of it is what I mentioned earlier, that there always is a concern when there's potential for some major change. You have to kind of process the need for the change. You have to understand what it is you're being asked to stop doing and what you're being asked to do. And officers, I think, have done that pretty effectively. And I think that was evidenced by a survey that was done by LMU that came out late last year that showed a pretty reasonable increase in the level of public confidence in the LAPD, even in some of the communities that had the greatest concern. And I liken it a little bit to people's view of Congress. You've heard that idea that people hate the institution or Congress, but they love their Congress member. And I think the more that that you get officers policing in a way that is more visible but also relational with the public, that people can have positive interactions with the police, see them in the communities in positive ways, what we're seeing is that people respond to that in a positive way as well. So it is, as I say, a complex dynamic. And then you deal with the fact that officers are, first and foremost, people themselves. So just as you and I have dealt with the complexities of COVID and all of the stress and strain associated with that, the same group of people have had to do that as well, but put on the uniform, go and produce a result for the public. And at the time that you're dealing with these things, and I think by and large, certainly not perfect. And believe me, I have, in some cases, been one of those asking the most questions on some of the tough issues. But I am in awe as an organization, as an institution. You didn't see any flagrant backlash here in Los Angeles. You didn't see what they call the blue flu, officers sitting down and just stopping enforcement. You didn't see any acting out. You didn't see any of the public confrontation between the mayor and the police chief that we saw during the Rodney King era. Those kinds of things just didn't happen here in Los Angeles, and part of it is because of the fortitude of the organization that's been built.
And the intent of the officers to actually be warmly received in the community that they serve, I imagine, as well. Are you seeing that? Are you hearing that from any of the reports that you're giving, excuse me, any of the reports that you are receiving, or any of the observations that you are making personally, that the rank and file is understanding the needs for these reforms, and the rank and file is more open to these changes, even if they need to happen slowly because of what they are hearing?
I think so. I would say, first of all, that sometimes there's a disconnect because what you or I might see or hear in the media and as part of the national narrative and the local narrative, two things can be true at the same time. That there can be that very deep and wide set of issues that need to be addressed. And at the same time, when you go into some of these rooms and you talk to police officers who have just come from a local gathering or from a store, and they are engaged with the community, and their individual experience may be different from what they're reading in the newspaper. So that's why sometimes you get the reaction of, "What are you talking about? Why are we?" So you have sometimes you have that situation. I think more officers do now understand, in part because with the passage of time, to new generation of officers. When you think about when I came into the work world, which is most of the leadership at the department is about my age, I'm 57, and probably most of them are younger actually at this point in time. But the point of it is that they would have come into the profession after the earlier era of some of the early leaders in the profession, some of the early traditional or kind of situations that you might have seen that were most troubling were really vestiges of an earlier time. That's not at all to say that serious and troubling situations do not occur today. They certainly do. What I'm saying is that you take the issue of race, for example, where the historical conversation has been about the risk of two white male officers going into a black community and beating up black citizens. And sure, there's some risk of that happening today, but the common situation today is you have a multiracial unit of officers of different race going into multiracial communities. Now, of course, we saw in Memphis that race itself is not the determining factor, but that's part of the point, is that when you have five officers who beat to death, five black officers who beat to death a black man, that's a key indicator itself, that there's something much more than race, which was the dominant factor in times past. I think that's the challenge really, is to help people understand that there are real and significant risks on the public side of the equation, and that crime is real, unfortunately, and continues to exist. And at the same time, officers have to have new approaches and new ways to try to prevent it, but also to deal with it when it does happen.
Who are we attracting into the LAPD? What are we doing with, the opportunities for those who will choose the LAPD or any law enforcement as a career, and what are they seeing that future as? And are there issues now finding those people within this Southern California area, despite the fact that we're actually in a better spot and a better place than some of the other places you've referenced?
I would say that that this is one of the key issues, the issue of staffing, recruiting and retaining the officers that you want and that you need and want into the profession. And already that you've had a lot of attrition, you've had the baby boom, factor of people, large numbers of people retiring. And what you've not seen is the same constant level of people coming to law enforcement. Now, some would in law enforcement would fast forward and say, well, it's because you have the bureaucrats, the police commissioner, and others that are doing and all these things that are driving people out of the profession. But it's much more complicated than that. That one, you take the global situation that you're almost in a full employment economy. So there's fierce competition for workers across the board, number one. And in law enforcement, you recruit people who were appliance repair people. You have people who come in from all different kinds of backgrounds, the military, academics, others who come to law enforcement. And at least in the current environment, they're also looking at opportunities that are much more available in other professions that come with less stress and and fewer demands. So you have that complexity. Added to that, in a place like Los Angeles, in Los Angeles County, with 88 cities in Los Angeles County, many of them have their own police departments. So the same pool of officers that might drive 10 miles one way or 20 miles one way are being recruited by dozens of police agencies and more if you add the federal agencies that operate here as well. So there's fierce competition even within the law enforcement community. Third, you have a lot of the morale issues, I think, and as I've talked to officers, one of the greatest sources of recruiting is other police officers and their families and friends. You see a lot of people who have fathers, mothers, fathers,
absolutely.
uncles, aunts, others who have been in the profession. And as those officers retire and are less excited, enthused, and interested. I mean, it could be about anything. It could be morale. It could be like the NFL, where people are looking at the long-term impacts of being in that profession, who don't want their NFL players, don't want their kids playing football. There's a little bit of element of that. But the point is that even one of the largest sources of recruits has also kind of slowed down. So you add all those things together. The pay is not always, what it should be. The stress of going in and doing more with less. So it's a real challenge that we see, and we see as the police commission, and there are a lot of, some commissioners in particular have dedicated a lot of time to that issue. But you're up against these other broader dynamics, and the concern is that we see and feel them a little bit today, but as you look 3-5 years down the road, that's where you're really going to see them. And lastly, to your point about the quality of officers, that's the other risk, is that at the same time that you have this fierce competition for just getting the number of bodies in the door, then you get to the question of you want the right people who have the right disposition, the right mindset, the right capacity to learn and improve. And some of that is playing out now in ways. I'll give you a couple of examples that the LAPD is one of the departments still that does not allow officers to have a full sleeve tattoo and visible tattoos, things of that nature. You contrast that with the sheriff's department or other agencies. That's fine. Come on in. Some agencies allow officers to have full beards and things of that nature. So I'm not advocating that the LAPD take that step, but it's clear that they are factors that have to be looked at in this kind of fierce competition. Is, do you turn otherwise qualified people away because they have attributes or other features that historically have not been within the image of the department? Wow. So there's gender issues where you need to make sure that you've got opportunities for women who can come into the profession, serve in meaningful sworn roles, and still meet other demands that you. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that in COVID, one of the biggest impacts was on women, and that was equally true in law enforcement as well. And so, vast reservoir of issues that I think need to be addressed and can be, but a lot of it is connected to this broader conversation of making policing an exciting place to be.
What positive things are you aware of that should be shared in the general public so that people's feelings about the future of the LAPD and the future of what will become the commission soon, people can feel, okay, I can hold on to that?
Well, one thing I would say is that it's unfortunate that so few people have the opportunity that I've had to just get to know police officers and to be in and around police officers in a number of different contexts, because one of the things you learn is, sure, at some level it's cut from a different cloth, people who are mission driven and things of that nature. And yes, there are people who are cynical about certain things, but what you really come away with, or what I've come away with, is a sense of the decency of the workforce and the people who have really spent many, many years dedicating their lives to the profession. And that's what gives me pause not to be so quick as to paint with too broad a brush everyone that makes up that profession.
Okay, well, if people want to learn more, there is a way that people can learn more about the LAPD and the commission?
Sure, they can go to lapdonline.org,
okay,
which is the website, and you'll find a lot of information about the police commission and the police department.
Well, thank you so much. This is utterly fascinating, and obviously I would like to stay with you all afternoon, but I think that I've run out of time. But thank you so much, Del, for being with us. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that's a wrap on this LA Currents.